Well, hello friends. Welcome to the SerenityOS update for April 2022. It's been a pretty laid-back month in the project, with around 95 people adding about 1,100 commits to the repo, and I've been on a side quest this month, which I will hopefully be able to announce in the coming weeks, but despite that, we've still seen a lot of SerenityOS development, so there's a whole bunch of things to show you today. Let's take a look around the system and see what's new for April. The first thing I want to show you is we have a new little applet down here. So previously we've already had the CPU and memory graphs, and now we also have a network graph, which if you click on it just opens up System Monitor. But basically it allows you to get a quick overview of incoming and outgoing traffic. And if we were to start doing some networking, like loading GitHub in the browser, you would start to see a little bit of activity down there in the network graph. So very, very nice just to get a quick visual idea of what's going on with traffic. And that was implemented by Kleines and Brian. I think they both worked on that. So thank you both. And another thing down here in the taskbar area is the clock. Actually, it's now configurable. So if we open up settings and go to clock, we can switch it between 24 and 12-hour modes. And we can also turn off the second view. And down here is a preview, of course, because it doesn't update live. Rather, you see a preview here of what it would look like. And it's pretty neat. And you can even create your own custom timestamps if you really wanted to, or custom time format if you want to have some totally weird one. We now let you do that. Look at that ridiculous format. I think maybe I'm going to go back to a simple 24-hour clock with seconds. Anyway, this was implemented by CFlip. And then Sam worked on it as well to do the preview, I think. And very, very nice feature. I know people have different preferences for how to show time. So it's just one of those things that gives the system that polished feel, I think. Some other random stuff. If we bring up a terminal, or any app really, I can show you some improvements to the command palette. So Fabian has worked on the command palette this month and implemented two things that I found particularly nice. So the first one is fuzzy matching. So here it says clear including history. So maybe I would type in ding for including, and it works because it's fuzzy matched. Previously you had to type exactly what you were looking for, and this is much more forgiving. Hopefully it will allow you to find stuff more easily if you don't remember exactly what it's called. And the other thing that Fabian did was if you switch to a different window, so I click on the desktop, any active command palette is now dismissed. Previously they would stay on screen. So just one of those little things that makes such a huge difference, because it felt so weird when it would stay on screen. So it's just behaves totally naturally now. So thank you, Fabian, for improving our command palette. Let's look at Pixel Paint. So I guess I can start that up this way. So main new UI thing this month is we have a histogram widget, which shows, I guess, a histogram of the red, green, and blue channels. And I mean, a bunch of black lines on white are not going to be the best test for that. So let me open up some bundled graphic like this guy right here. And we can see that it's indeed a histogram of the RGB channels. Pretty cool. And this was added by Torsten, I think. And I don't actually personally know how to make use of it, but it looks neat. And I'm going to learn what it's for and how to use it, I promise. Maybe somebody can tell me in the comments what these things are for. And another thing that we can see in Pixel Paint, although it isn't specific to Pixel Paint, is we now have QOI encoding support. So QOI is a new bitmap format, basically, by Dominik Sablewski, I think his name is. And we already had a decoder for it, but now we also have an encoder, so we can write out QOI files. And this was implemented by Olivier. So let's try to save this as Boogie right here. And it totally seems to have worked. Pretty awesome. So thank you, Olivier, for adding QOI encoding support. And let me discard that. I think actually we also have QOI export from the Mandelbrot Fractal program. Also, now that I say that, is it Mandelbrot or Mandelbro? Or maybe it's pronounced some other way entirely. Either way, we can now export a QOI of your fractal. So we'll call it Fractal QOI. Image was successfully exported. That dialog may be a bit much. I feel like the user is probably going to assume that it worked. Maybe we should limit the dialogues to if something went wrong. But look at that. Just beautiful. Anyway, thank you. Thank you, everybody who worked on QOI stuff. And let me show you something else that's pretty neat in Text Editor. So a particular pet peeve of mine was that our undo system was kind of unreliable before. It would frequently mash together several, what felt like several sub-editings or whatever. Like if I would do a bunch of typing and then wait a bit and then do some other typing, and then I would decide to undo this, then previously that would undo as a single step. Whereas now we actually have a time limit. So after a certain time, the current undo item is kind of committed, and then you begin a new undo item. And when you press undo, you then step through these individual things. And I think the timeout is something like 400 milliseconds. And it just feels much, much better to edit now because you can be more confident that you're going to be able to undo and redo in like finer steps. And this was implemented by For Love of Cats, which is a great name because I also love cats. And this is a great feature. I love it. So thank you for implementing that. And since we have Text Editor up, let me also show you another neat thing. If we have a long line here that wraps, wrapped lines will now have their line number top aligned. And this was, I mean, now it just looks normal, but previously it would be center aligned vertically. So the two would have been somewhere in the middle here, which always looked weird. But it was one of those weird things that was weird, but I didn't do anything about it. So this month, Lucas went and did something about it, and it just looks so much better. So thank you, Lucas, for doing that. Anyway, let's pass the microphone to somebody else.
All right, so let's look at all the LibJS changes from April. There hasn't been a whole lot of development on LibJS, just people enjoying the holidays and doing other stuff. But there's a couple of things that we can look at. This month, I don't have a major test 262 update to report. The score has increased slightly, but not noticeably. So we'll skip that this time. And let's start with a small change from Luke. So they did some changes to eval, specifically correctness fixes in certain contexts. For example, calling super from eval within a class constructor. So that's indeed possible. Let's make a small example here. So let's say we have a class foo, and then we define a constructor, which is going to be called when we instantiate that class. And then let's say we just console.log and then eval. And in that eval, we put a string, just super, which is going to call the base class constructor, which doesn't exist here. So if we say new foo, this doesn't work. So it determines we're not in a derived constructor, so super is not valid here, and it throws a syntax error. But if we make a base class, it's a class A, and then we make a class B, which extends from A, and use the same constructor here. Now, if you instantiate that B, so new B, when calling the constructor, it is a derived constructor, and so eval can now look at that and recognize that super is indeed valid here, and it's going to print out the underlying object. So that's a really nice fix. They also added a bunch of tests, which is really nice. And then lastly, added a check, which is later going to be used in the content security policy, which can disallow calling eval. So that's going to be important later on. And then next up, Ali did some changes to the bytecode interpreter. So I have to restart JS with the -b flag here. And specifically, he added sending values to generators. So you can not only yield values, but they can also receive values from the caller of next. So let's make another example here. Let's say function asterisk for generator function gen, and then we can say const value equals yield, and then some anything, just say foo here, and then we yield back that value that we got, like this. Very simple. And then we make a new instance of that. So G is calling gen, and that's now an instantiated generator. And so we first set that up by calling next once with no value. And so as you can see, that yields back from the first yield. So we receive foo as value and done as false, because there's further yields. And if we call next again, it will still give us a value. But this time we pass something. So let's say bar. And so now we executed this piece, and it's basically now waiting for a value here. So if we pass bar, we get to this point, and then the next yield yields back that value. So as you can see, value is bar, so basically yielded back what we just passed it, and done false. So if we call next again, yields undefined and is finished. So that doesn't work in the AST interpreter. Generators only work in the bytecode mode. But this is a nice fix for that. So thank you, Ali, for that. And then some things that I can't really demo. Tim made some changes around typed arrays. Couple of spec changes have been merged, so he did some refactoring there, and also some changes around detached array buffers. And then I did also some temporal updates, as usual, a couple of small bug fixes and some refactoring. Also nothing that can really be shown here. And also a special shout out to Ilan, who has been also tracking down temporal bugs and reporting them upstream, or fixing them in our own implementation if they were just engine bugs and not spec bugs. So thank you for that. It's really cool. Okay, so let's look at some of the browser and LibWeb changes from this month. Let's start with one that I actually mentioned in last month's video. So we have this storage inspector that someone added recently, and it already had a cookies view. And so I mentioned we could also put the local storage here. And so Valtteri went ahead and did exactly that. And now, so on this website, I just put 2 keys and values into the local storage, just using the local storage.set item function. And as you can see, it lists all of them. So it's still very basic. Like, I don't think I can actually copy and paste them here or even edit them, but this is a nice start. So thank you for that. And then Ali did something that I really like, but can't actually demo because I don't have a local setup. And it is proxies, specifically SOX5. So let's have a look at the pull request here, which is titled libcore plus request server proxies of the SOC variety. Quite like the title here. And so basically what you do is in the browser config file, define a proxy entry here, and then SOX5, and then your local address and port, and then a pattern for which URLs you want to proxy through that server, and then does that for you. So this is really cool for the people who need that kind of thing. And then we have a change from Enver, and they added Flexbox Reverse Layout support and ordering. So in Flexbox, you can say order : and then a number. And so then you can reorder elements into a different order than what they are specified in the HTML. So for example, on this page, every element that says 1, 2, and 3 is defined in the HTML in that order. So 1 is at the top, then 2, and then the element that says 3. But just using CSS Flexbox, you can reorder them in different ways. And all of that is tested here. So that's really nice. It's very common for like mobile optimizations of a website where you have like a horizontal layout, and then on the mobile screen, it would switch to a vertical layout, things like that. And then you want to reorder some things. So this is really nice to have. Thank you for that. And then Simon implemented request idle callback and the accordingly cancel idle callback functions. I think we can look at this in the JS console. Also here you can see the local storage changes I made previously. And you can use that for, as the name says, requesting a callback when the browser is currently idle. So, specifically when the event loop is currently not working on things and delivering events. So for example, if we say request idle callback, and then just passing a function here, let's say alert 1. There's also a timeout, which will force execution of that callback after a certain period if it hasn't happened yet. But so this is how it works. And to actually trigger this in the browser, we need to trigger an event. I don't think that's actually correct, so we should probably fix that. But so if I resize this window, you see it triggered the callback. So it determined that currently there's an idle point, and then we can execute that. So that's a nice addition of a new API. So thank you for that. And then Kenneth did a bunch of changes on XML HTTP request, which is still the only dynamic HTTP call interface we have, still no fetch. But that's still super commonly used across the web. So it's nice to get from our previous sort of ad hoc implementation to a more standardized implementation. So he added a bunch of different overloads and did fixes for how headers are set and stuff like that. Really nice work there. Andreas did a architectural change. So previously we had an in-process web view where you would run all the web content code in the same process as the embedding applications. For example, in the browser, you would have all these widgets here and tabs and user interface, and then in that same process, it would also run the code. But at some point, we replaced that with an out-of-process web view and ported most applications, including the browser, to that. And so when you access web content, it spawns a separate process, and so all the parsing and execution of JavaScript is in a tightly sandboxed process, and it interfaces to that with IPC. And so we removed the last bits of the in-process web view, and now out-of-process web view is the only available option. And that reduced a bit of complexity in the surrounding APIs. And of course, security, because there's no longer a way to do the in-process thing. So that's nice. And then Sam, of course, as usual, did a bunch of changes on the CSS Parser, which is probably the thing that improves with the most consistency in the browser. There's no month where I don't mention Sam. And this month he worked on, for example, font face, recognizing some more attributes. Still not 100% there, but lots of improvements. And just general refactorings of the parser and renaming things to better match the spec. And I know he also worked on some code generation. So instead of writing out big enums, I think we can now generate them from some source. So really cool stuff there. And then also CSS, but this time by Simon. He worked on support for WFF font, so Web Open Font Format, which I think is simply TTF, but zlib compressed, something like that. So I think we actually have a page here. Yeah, so you can see some tested fonts. So this just loads a couple of fonts and then renders a certain glyph. And if it shows as a checkmark, that font format is supported. And if not, then it's not supported. So he added a loader for that font format to libgfx and then some plumbing to the browser itself. So it's good to have more supported formats there. And then Luke worked on some Canvas stuff. So let's also demo that. And this is just an unrelated Canvas page. So let me just clear it. ctx.reset, I think. Yes, okay. And so Luke worked on transforms. We also already had some basic rotation support, but now you can do arbitrary transformations basically. So for example, let's say ctx.fillStyle is red, just so we can actually see what we're painting here. And then let's make a transform. So that works like this, ctx.transform. And now you pass a couple of arguments. So one is horizontal scaling. Let's pass 2. Then 0, 0, that's skewing. I don't think we support that yet. Then comes vertical scaling. Let's pass 1. And then an offset. So let's say 2020. That's from the top left corner. And so now that context has a global transform basically set up. And now everything we paint will be transformed accordingly. So if we say ctx.fillRect and start at 0, 0 and make a perfect rectangle. So let's say 100 by 100. Like this, you would expect it to start at the very top of the corner and then be a perfect square. But because of that transform, it actually starts at 10, 10 and gets scaled twice as much horizontally than vertically. And so this is really useful if you just have a bunch of transformations and don't want to apply them to each individual operation manually in your code. You can just set up a global transform and then the browser will do it for you. So that's really nice. And of course also the method to reset that transform. And I think that's all I got for today.
All right, thank you. So let's continue looking at random stuff. Another thing I like this month is in our crash reporter. Actually, I forget where the crash program is. Yeah, let me simulate a crash here. So when you get a crash, we now have a save backtrace option, which just allows you to, well, save the backtrace, which can be super handy if you don't want to lose it. So here that is. Very simple feature, but just makes perfect sense. And this was implemented by Ali. So thank you very much, Ali, for doing that. And something else, if we open up our display settings right here, then we now have a new themes tab right here. So you can set the theme from display settings. Previously, it was only accessible via the menu down here. But now we also offer it here with a neat preview, and you can kind of get a little look at it before you decide to use one of them. Pretty neat. So I tend to use default always, but it is always nice to play around with other themes every now and then. I know some people like different themes. So we have, I think, a couple of new themes now, like Chili Chili is new by DJ Wisdom. And there's also been a bunch of polish work on some of our themes, like the Cupertino theme keeps being improved. I know that there has been improvements to the way we draw these buttons in the title bar. So you're not going to notice it in our default theme, but let me find one that, yeah, this is a great example. So we can now have window buttons here that don't have a border. Previously, I think they always had a border, and now we have this light theme, for example, that has borderless buttons, and it looks kind of neat, I suppose. And it's just adding more options for customizing themes, making themes a bit more interesting. So that was, I think, adding the option for having themes drawing buttons or not, that was implemented by MacDo, and then a bunch of people worked on themes. I know that Joel did the light thing specifically, and I mentioned DJ Wisdom has been doing a bunch of themes, and I feel like more people worked on themes, but I forget exactly who it was. But I want to say thank you anyway to everybody who works on polishing our themes. I think it's definitely the case that our themes are not perfect. So it's great to see sort of incremental improvement on themes. Instead of just adding more and more themes, it's awesome that people are actually taking the time to improve the ones that we have. And let me switch back to default, which is obviously my personal favorite. Anyway, let's see what else. I saw a neat little change, which I thought was really nifty, which was, let me see if I open up an instance of, I wanted a 3D file viewer. Yeah, this guy right here. I know that, well, let me turn off textures. I know that I can now drag and drop these things. So if I drop the tuba file on the window, then it just opens. This was implemented by James, I think. Just simple drag and drop support for 3D file viewer. It's a little thing, but all these little things, they just make the system a little bit better. So thank you very much for doing that. We also have a new app this month called SQL Studio, which is very early beginnings of I guess a database query editing and execution app. And this was started by Dylan. And I don't think it does much other than like allowing you to edit and save SQL queries, and it does syntax highlighting, but there should be more to come here. I know that Dylan has a bunch of interesting ideas in the works, but at the moment, it's just a pretty neat looking, standard looking SQL editor. So exciting to see what comes of that. Our SQL database library keeps improving continuously in the background. It's just, I'm really looking forward to seeing some actual integration of it into other parts of the system. So this is definitely a step in the right direction. I'm very excited about that. Oh, let me show you something else, by the way. Kleines went and solved one of our earliest issues in the issue tracker, which was about System Monitor. So I filed an issue forever ago about how it would be so neat if in this process tab here in System Monitor, if you could see individual subthreads of a process as well. And now, thanks to Kleines, you can. So we can see here that System Monitor has a secondary thread, and it just opens up like a little nice tree. And you can see individual threads underneath sort of the main thread, which is the top level thing. Same thing we have. The audio, it's moving a little fast, actually. Let me open that up. Yeah, so the audio applet has a secondary thread as well for some reason. Not actually sure why, but I'm sure it's doing something. And it's just a nice visualization, I think, of that. Also, I noticed that the idle thread is now visible here, which it's not supposed to be. We're supposed to hide that. So I guess this is a regression from rewriting this to be a tree view. We typically hide the idle thread so that the numbers make sense. But anyway, this is really awesome. And I know that in support of this, kleines also went and ported the entire system monitor application to GML. So previously, this was a programmatically constructed UI in C++, and kleines went and added a bunch of missing functionality to GML so that we could express this UI in GML. And let me actually show you one of those things that he added. So this is really, really nice, actually. So it's now possible to make a tab widget with GML like this. So I guess you would just add tabs by creating widgets inside the tab widget. Also, why does that thing... Something goes really weirdly wrong when I dismiss that pop-up. Then I lose focus in this app. That's not very good. Okay, that definitely needs some work. But yeah, you can see that I'm adding tabs here now. Previously, it was not possible to add tabs. And you can set a title, like, okay, that is super irritating. How did we not notice this? Hello. And let's do a second one. Friends. And also, because I typically say, well, hello, friends, let's add the well. Here we go. I'll press the auto format button. Not only can you add tabs like this, but you can also add stuff inside the tabs, of course. So vertical box layout and so on. And then GUI button or something like that. Oop. Let's see, can we get this working? Oh wait, that doesn't go in there, that goes in here. Yes, a button. Yeah, it's been a while since I used GML Playground. It seems to need a little bit of love, but super exciting that we can now actually express tabbed UIs in GML. Previously, we had to just put a tab widget there and do the rest in C++, but now you can do these hierarchies with tabs. And this is going to allow us to port even more of our UI code to GML, which is really awesome. So thank you, kleines, for adding tab support to GML. And let me show you something else. We have seen some cool changes in Hex Editor this month. So let me grab a binary like bin shell, for example. And open it up in Hex Editor. So a feature that I thought was really neat was this thing called a value inspector. So this was implemented by Timothy and then also worked on by kleines. So now if you place the cursor somewhere, then you can see over here sort of how that value where the cursor is would be interpreted if it were different data types. So like if we start here and we read a signed short int from there, then it would be 2302. And this is pretty neat. So it just has all these different C++ data types like, you know, ints, unsigned ints, floats, doubles, stuff like that. And I look at all these crazy numbers. Also ASCII UTF-8, very handy. And there's obviously more stuff that we could do, but I feel like this is still a hugely awesome feature. Instead of just seeing the hex bytes, we can now also interpret them in some interesting ways. And you can also switch between little and big endian. How sweet is that? Anyway, thank you for everybody who worked on Hex Editor. So great to see this app getting some love. And now I'm gonna, once again, pass the microphone to somebody else.
Thanks, Andreas. So, as you might know, I'm kleines Filmröllchen, and I want to take a look at some of the audio subsystem changes that we've had over the last couple of months. Because, as you might know, we haven't taken a close look at audio in the last couple of update videos. So let's do that right now and jump straight into the most awesome thing that happened in February, which is RNA's MP3 loader got added to the system. And I did some cleanup work there as well. So if we open the unnamed anime song in Sound Player, you can see that it plays perfectly fine. This is an MP3, as you can see up here. And it's also able to like seek around and stuff. So, and while we're here, let's look at the next change, which is Nicolas's album visualizer. So if I switch over to the album cover visualization, you can see that it loads a file with a name, for example, cover.jpg from the current folder, and then it will just display it here. And that's super cool. This is not the correct cover for this song, but still, it loads it. Let's actually go back to the bars visualization, because Arne and me did some pretty substantial changes to this. Of course, it existed before, but it's really cool how it changed, because we basically updated it to be more physically correct, because our ears are logarithmic both in volume and in frequency. So something that we want to do is have a spectrum visualization which is logarithmic, and that's what this new bars visualization now does. So you can see this is the logarithmic visualization. Let's scroll back so that we get more fancy moving graphs. If I turn off the logarithmic scaling, you can see that's what it was looking like before. But now it's just much nicer this way. And also, this is not really visible for most people, but we did some changes on how we do the fast Fourier transform for calculating the frequencies, and how we window that transform. This is like goes into the details on how you do spectral analysis, but basically we're much more correct now in our spectral analysis that we do here. So that's super cool. And let's open a different kind of file, namely a FLAC file in Sound Player, because I have something really cool to show about FLAC. If we open this little FLAC file here, I can show you that Max implemented seek in FLAC. So with seek tables, you can now like click on any point in the FLAC file. It will take some time to load because it's not the best algorithm yet, but it can seek to random points in the file. Actually, like the seeking is broken in both FLAC and in Sound Player, but it's a nice start, and we need to take small steps. So that was Max's FLAC seed. Thank you, Max. And now something that I can't really show you very well or demo you very well is the changes in the kernel relating to audio. So if we tree/def, you might be able to see, if I enlarge the terminal a little bit, that there is actually a device under audio, and audio itself is not a file or a pseudo file anymore. It's now a directory. And what has happened here is that Liev went in, refactored the entire audio subsystem so that we now have a channel and a device and these kinds of concepts, and like the channels forward their audio data to the device and tell it which channel to play it on and so on, which will be really cool to support for these kinds of devices that have multiple channels. Of course, right now we only have the AC97 driver, which only has one channel, at least in terms of output, but we can support more than that, and we can also more easily support input. So that's super nice. Thank you, Liev. That will help us in the future a lot with like multiple input-output audio devices. Okay. And something else that I can't really show you is my big giant rework of the userland system, which was PR 12102, which I can remember by heart because it took a couple of months to get that ready. So here I have an image which displays the basic overview of how the new audio system works. It basically uses a shared queue of samples which are transmitted from the userland to the audio server, and that reduces latency, that reduces memory allocations, and it has a bunch of other nice benefits. So it's not really noticeable even if you do play audio, but it's a really big step forward in making apps like Piano real-time capable. So that was all of the big changes of the last couple of months. I have some other small things to show you. If we actually use the other audio playing utility, aplay, and give it noise and tune maybe, you can see that Applet now has this nice progress bar. Before we would only show the samples. Now we show the seconds remaining and the total time, and it updates very fast, like half a second or something like that. And this is something that I did. I just find it super cool to be able to like see the actual seconds progress like in Sound Player, because I'm really a command line audio playing guy. Okay, that was all of the things that were visible. Of course, I must mention several fixes and refactorings and minor improvements that Jelle and Brian contributed, which is always super nice to see that LibAudio is getting some love and other parts of the audio system are getting some love. So great work by everyone, and we made some big progress in the last couple of months, and I hope that you're interested in audio work now that you've seen what we've accomplished with our small team. And if you're interested in talking to us, you can just post in the #audio channel on Discord, and that's the place where you can reach us. So cheers, and I'll give back to Andreas.
Okay, thank you. So now let's talk about some low-level kernel stuff. New this month is better support for static routing tables. So we have a new route command added by Brandon, and Brandon also worked a lot on our routing implementation, and this routing command can be used in various ways to create manual routes and delete routes, stuff like that. Very, very nice to actually get some progress on supporting more complex routing. So thank you very much, Brandon, for working on routing. And Brandon also worked on the netstat command, which now does name resolution for IP addresses. So we actually look up what we're connected to here. And I think if we pass this, then we get a wide mode. Yeah, if it's sometimes the names are a bit too long, so we would cut them off. But if you pass the wide mode flag, then we show the full name. I actually not sure why I have all these sockets open. Oh, wait, it's because I have a browser open. Okay. Right. I was supposed to show you in this browser that DJ Wisdom wrote a nice big document explaining how to use our font editor. So you can find this if you want to work on creating fonts or like expanding glyph coverage in our fonts, then there's now a great resource here where it explains how to use it, and you'll find it under documentation font editor using font editor. Thank you very much, DJ Wisdom, for taking the time to write a document about that. DJ Wisdom and Jelle and many other people continue to add tons of font glyphs to SerenityOS, and let's see if we can get the right page. Yes. Well, hello, fonts. Will it load? It did load. This is on fonts.serenityos.net. You will find all the latest data about coverage. And it says here, this site got a huge shout out on SerenityOS update for March. And now we're in the SerenityOS update for April. And once again, I'm going to give a huge shout out to Jelle's website, fonts.serenityos.net. So this is really awesome. So you can see here just the intense amount of work that goes into our fonts. And I think, yeah, I'm going to look at it once again. Will it load? It does load. It's so cool that you see the avatars of the people who worked on it here too. Somebody told me that we recently reached 20,000 glyphs, I think, across all of our fonts, which is just bananas. Like that's so many glyphs. And I just want to say, I don't know if congratulations or thank you or maybe both to all the awesome people who continue to work on our fonts, because my goodness, the fact that I can go to I think I already showed this once. Maybe that was in the last video, but it's so cool that you can go to Wikipedia and just look at this language list here. And there are no missing characters. That, I don't know, this just blows my mind that we have this kind of coverage in our fonts, which, you know, when I originally made them, it was just a silly English-only ASCII font, and it has grown so much since then. Thank you all so much for working on that. But wait, I was talking about networking, and then I got sidetracked by fonts. Anyway, in the kernel, which is why I was talking about networking in the first place, we now have static routing. Already talked about that. So let me show you something else from the kernel. If we look at ls CPU, we can now see what type of hypervisor we are running under, if you're running under a hypervisor. This was added by Linus, and this allows me to see that I'm running in a KVM-enabled hypervisor. So that's pretty neat. Thank you, Linus, for working on that. Also in the kernel this month, I did a bunch of work on memory allocation. So we've had a long architectural problem with our page allocation code that the page allocator needs to malloc, and that could sometimes create a problem when you were out of memory and then you had to malloc in order to allocate more pages. Obviously not a great situation to be in, and I'm happy to report that the Kernel Virtual Memory Allocator has been rewritten using allocation-free data structures. So it's now built around intrusive red-black trees, and I'm super happy with that because it means we see fewer kernel crashes due to out-of-memory conditions. And special shout out, by the way, to Idan, who did a lot of great work on the red-black tree implementation. Also in the kernel this month, we've continued to remove uses of the big lock. So we have this big lock, we call it, which sort of guards the kernel so that only one thread from each process is able to run in the kernel at the same time. This is a huge bottleneck for any kind of parallelism in the system. So we are continuously auditing code that depends on the big lock for synchronization and replacing it with more fine-grained locks, sort of like what Linux did decades ago. We're kind of going through the same process. And this month I got a bunch of help on the big lock stuff from Idan and Luke and Jelle. So I wanted to thank all of you for helping me with that. And there are still many, many syscalls and code paths that need to be audited, but it's going to be so good to get rid of the big lock when we get there. Anyway, that's stuff about the kernel. So let me once again pass the microphone to somebody else.
Thank you, Andreas. So I'd like to demo some things that we've done with LibGL and LibSoft GPU in the past couple of months. So the first thing I'd like to show is our new support for normal pointers. This is something I've built for LibGL. And basically what that means is that games are now able to communicate normal information of the surfaces of objects in-game to us. And that allows us to render the lighting correctly. So for example, you can see the cycles here. Previously these would be white or black or just the same bland type of yellow. And now we actually have pretty nice lighting. And yeah, you can see this working pretty nicely. It almost looks like the original running on Linux. So that's great. Another thing I built was support for Monkey Island 4. So we already have ScumVM running inside of Serenity, and now when you try to boot up Monkey Island 4, you'll get the game. And I have not tried out how far you can get in this game yet, but I imagine you can get pretty far if you just ignore all the red movie stuff happening here. if you just press escape enough times, you'll get in game. And look at this, you can just play the game. The fun thing about ScumVM is that a lot of functionality that they use from LibGL is shared between games that use it, and it's mainly Grim Fandango and Monkey Island 4 at the moment. But yeah, these types of games are my favorite games, so I really like the fact that it's now running inside of Serenity. And then I continued with improving support for ScumVM games, and Grim Fandango is a game where the lighting would not always work properly. So let me pull that right up. I have a scene demo right here. For example, if I were to walk up to this position, basically Manny, the main character of Grim Fandango, would be just rendered completely black. And now you can see we have proper lighting. These are all very small improvements that we have been preparing and integrating into LibGL. But as you can see, they make a lot of difference for the total look and feel of a game. So one of the most exciting new developments in SerenityOS has been the incremental support for the rendering of Tux's feet in Tux Racer. So where we would previously have these bland brownish feet on Tux, you can see now that we render them correctly. He has a nice yellow beak, he has nice yellow feet. This is just wonderful. It brings tears to my eyes. And now Quake. Quake 1 has GL Quake, and that already worked. But two new exciting things have happened there. One is that Stefan has been working on mip-mapping support, which is support for rendering textures based on versions of different sizes. So for example, if I'm really up close to a texture here, we tend to stretch out pixels that you see here with linear interpolation. But when I move back, these pixels that we try to render get smaller and smaller. And at a certain point, the pixels on my screen are smaller than the pixels of the texture. So what mip-mapping then does is select a smaller version of that texture to prevent any aliasing artifacts. And this is working great. Quake really looks like it did back in the 90s when you were to play this on a voodoo card, for example. So great work by Stefan. Another thing that has happened is that I've basically fixed all the artifacts in Quake 1, where sometimes you would still see some white pixels at triangle boundaries, for example, or between objects. That's no longer the case. It seems like all those artifacts have gone. So that's great. We can just play Quake like it's meant to. But that's not all. Another thing I did was OpenGL support for Quake 2. We already had Quake 2 as a port using the software rasterizer, but now we have OpenGL support. So this is actually using LibGL to render everything you see on screen. And this was actually pretty easy to get working, because once you get the first Quake engine up and running, you only need to build in support for a couple of new OpenGL calls that they actually use. And as you can see, it's running great. It's actually running faster than Quake 1 for some reason. Not sure why, but I like it. And then Jesse came along, and Jesse made sure that we had Quake 3. So we now have all three Quakes inside of SerenityOS readily available to play. We still have some graphical glitches like movies not rendering correctly, but as you can see here, we can just go in and start fragging. Missed the portal there. Yeah. So as you can see, it's running pretty nicely. We can absolutely introduce some more performance improvements, but it's great to see, such a relatively recent OpenGL game running inside of Serenity on our own software rasterizer. That's, it's crazy. And finally, I'd like to mention some changes that are not really easy to show off. For example, Stefan has been working a lot on libGPU, which is an abstraction layer between LibGL and LibSoft GPU, which enables us to not only switch out the API. For example, we can have libFalcon talking to libGPU, but we can switch out the rasterizer as well. Instead of LibSoft GPU, we could have a hardware implementation, for example, a hardware device. That's really cool, and it opens up a lot of roads to implement hardware support for LibGL in the end. Lenny has been working on improving the performance of LibSoft GPU. For example, he has been working to improve Clipper, which is our implementation of making sure that triangles that go partially off screen are turned into multiple triangles that fit neatly inside of the screen. And he has also been working on preventing unnecessary data copies in LibSoft GPU. And also new is a LibGL Test Suite. This test suite is comparing the output of some GL calls to reference images, or so-called golden tests. And by doing this, we make sure that we are not introducing any regressions in the code. That was it for this month. Back to you, Andreas.
And that's all the stuff we had to show you here today. So thank you so much for checking in and staying up to date with the project. And also thank you to my co-hosts, Linus, Jelle, and now kleines Filmröllchen as well. If you want to come chat, do join the SerenityOS Discord server. There's a link to that in the video description. And I also have a weekly live stream here on YouTube. It's every Friday at 4 p.m. Swedish time. It's called SerenityOS Office Hours, and everybody is welcome to ask anything they want to know about SerenityOS. Finally, if you would like to sponsor development of SerenityOS, then you can find donation options for some of our developers in the video description below. I'm personally working on this full-time since May of last year, thanks to the generous support of many awesome people. So thank you all for allowing me to do that. All right, that's it. Thanks for today, and see you next time. Bye.